What up, folks? How we doing? Victor Coronado here alongside Carlos Cruz Mosquera. This is Sons of Fidel and Anticonquista production. You can check us out at anticonquista.com. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Please like, please subscribe, please share. We appreciate all the support. Carlos Cruz Mosquera, how we doing, brother?
All good, man. All good. How you doing, bro?
I'm doing all right. Did you get a chance to check out the M1 interview? I was wondering what your let's start off there first. What your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've been a fan of Dead Prez for a long time. I've got like a very random story. One time, there's a place here in London called Camden Town, North London, and I happened to be there because there was a place, like a food place I used to like going to. So I was there. And then I was walking towards the restaurant and I see Stickman and M1 from Dead Prez running, jogging like on a fitness thing in Camden Town. It was like the weirdest, most random thing I've seen. But yeah, like obviously I immediately recognized them because as a socialist, as a communist, as an activist, Dead Prez I think are like and also if you're into rap, I think like they're the main group really that that stands out in terms of the commentary. And it's not just the commentary, I think it's the quality of it, because there's so much. There are conscious rappers and stuff who try and even here in the UK we have some and they're quite good in terms of like the content and the lyrics, but also the style I think is where they take it. Like they take the crown. Like they've got both the style and the content. And also because in the past I have been I have been to meetings with the Uhuru movement with Omali Yeshitela here when it comes to London and stuff. So through that link as well, I do believe I came across them because of Omali Yeshitela and listening to his speeches and stuff. So yeah. And the interview itself was awesome, particularly like the kind of the things, like the little jewels, the things behind the scenes that you didn't know about. That Fat Joe being woke, and but not wanting to get involved because he doesn't want to, he doesn't want to mess up his career and stuff. I found hilarious, but super interesting.
Absolutely.
So I suggest people check it out if they have time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The Fat Joe thing was funny. I don't know if people remember. So if I remember correctly, yeah, Big Pun was also signed to Loud Records, and Big Pun has that one track where Stick, like they're in the studio and Stick is like he's like singing and whatnot. They got like this very dope melodic beat. And then Stick tells, Big Pun, like, go ahead, man, sing. And then Big Pun's like, nah, man, I'm not a singer. But then he gives a little try or whatever. So there's a lot of that cool. They've done a lot of really good work, man. And they spoke to that. Memo spoke to that. He was like, he's about that issue of quality. He just said, look, it's not about just making that's cool, but it's about making dope revolutionary music. And they definitely on both fronts, from theory to
I think also, Victor, you were talking about M1's character, as not just as a rapper, but as an activist and as a man, like as a person. And just to speak to that, like I think it was a couple of years ago that M1 came over to do a gig for Palestine, and I know one of the organizers, and I was talking to them like, how the hell and not just M1, but they also got Havoc from Mobb Deep.
Yeah.
And I was asking them like, how did you guys manage to get M1 and Havoc? And they were just like, we didn't even pay. We just said to them, we'll pay like the flights and accommodation, but we didn't even offer them money. And they were like, we're down. So imagine like to travel all the way from the US to do a gig and not get paid, just for the cause, just for.
No, that's how he is. That's how he. By the way, he sent me a text just for the audience to know. He sent me a text. That I said, I forwarded to you comrades, us comrades over here at Anticonquista. He did apologize. He had an unplanned trip with his family, and he just hit like wherever he was in Florida. That was it. Like he had no signal, and that by the time he had signal back, it was just like he couldn't get back on, but he has agreed to jump back on and do another interview, and we may have some unfinished business, which he said I could mention. This is very preliminary. Nothing's concrete, but we have, I have had discussions with him about doing some type of collaboration, if you will, between Anticonquista and People Army. So hopefully, again, very preliminary. There's nothing concrete, but that would be exciting if we can do something like that. So there's that. Carlos, let's start off with diaspora news. I'm going to hand it over to you. What's happening over in the UK?
In the UK, with the Latin Americans, really the most important thing that's happened in the last week is a shop unit in Elephant and Castle, which is a neighborhood here in South London, where Latin Americans tend to concentrate. Especially that particular area is like a business area for Latin Americans. In the surrounding area, you do have like a lot of residential blocks and stuff that Latin Americans live in. But that particular place, like the center of Elephant and Castle, that neighborhood, is where all the businesses are, particularly Colombian businesses, barbers, what do you call them? Places where you get your cars fixed, garages, and just shops, general shops that you could go get like your goods like from Colombia, snacks and foods and things that you can't really get anywhere else. So this particular place, one of these shops, it wasn't actually a Latin American shop that caught fire. It was a mechanics thing belonging to South Asian people, caught fire, and then there was a massive blast that affected a few other shops, including some of the Latino shops, some of the Colombian shops. Luckily, nobody was hurt, but yeah, the video of it, if you guys can YouTube or Google it, is it looked like. Luckily, I think they understood that something like that was going to happen, so they evacuated people. But yeah, it was a massive blast, and yeah, so that kind of scared the community a little bit. But luckily, yeah, nothing major happened to anybody.
Wow. And actually, before we get into the and I failed to mention, this is our weekly news roundup, our Nuestra America news roundup. I apologize for not mentioning that. Obviously, it's already titled, and that's why folks are here. And talking about imagery, I am going to share. Give me a second here, folks. We are going to do one bit of sharing here. Let's see here. And I think a lot of folks have seen some of these images, but this is a burst pipeline, causes the eye. This is how it's been labeled in the news media, causes eye of fire in Gulf of Mexico. I mean, this is pretty wild. There's the image. I know I saw a post by Immortal, another revolutionary rapper, Immortal Technique, and that's how I first learned about it. And here's just some more images. That's pretty wild. And many folks keep saying this is just something out of a movie. Just wild stuff there. Any thoughts before we get into our news roundup?
No, just to say, like, again, like another fire in the Latin American community, but luckily in both events, nothing. Seemingly, that's what it's saying. Though for the Mexican, for that fire in the Mexican Gulf, we do have to keep an eye out and see what the after effects of that fire has been. The company has said that there wasn't any spillage and stuff. So hopefully that's true, and the natural environment and the communities nearby aren't affected by it. But yeah, the image itself was crazy. Absolutely.
All right, so here let's go into some of the headlines. I'm gonna read some headlines here for folks, and Carlos, I'll after each headline I'll pause and wait to see if you have a response. If you don't, that's fine. We can just go to the next one. In the Mexico, Central America, Caribbean region, Tropical Storm Elsa has passed through the island of Hispaniola, or Haiti, and the Dominican Republic, leaving 3 dead. It's now expected to move towards Jamaica and parts of eastern Cuba before reaching Florida. And actually, just before we jumped on, I did find out that Cuba has now evacuated 70,000 people on the island's southern region today. Any thoughts, Carlos?
Yeah, and the history of hurricanes in the Caribbean, Cuba has, it's kind of like when we can see the difference between how countries are managed in terms of their economy. The socialist economy of Cuba, of course, always puts its people first. And so you see that in the way they evacuate people, in the way they take care of people, in the way also, I was also reading like the differences between what happens in places like Dominican Republic and Haiti compared to what happens in Cuba, which, it does affect Cuba, but not to the same extent because of the policies they have. Like, for example, deforestation. Cuba has a different policy to those countries. It has a strong environmental ministry that makes sure that the natural environment is in the right condition to take these kind of things. And that's why I think in Haiti, particularly because of deforestation, the forests are, when these hurricanes hit, the trees, the trees are uprooted very easily and so on. Whilst in Cuba, it's not the same. So yeah, and also, of course, like, the way they treat the people, the way they take care of the people is, you can kind of measure the differences in that as well. As you said, like tens of thousands of Cubans already evacuated, and it even, it even shows how different it is to how people are treated in the U.S. as well. Where it's supposed to be a first world country where people are taken care of and stuff. And in fact, in some of these areas in Florida and obviously in other places, like when Hurricane Katrina hit and stuff, you saw how the people were abandoned and neglected by the state in a first world country, in a capitalist country, in a so-called developed country, while Cuba, protects its people. And yeah, usually, even though they are hardly hit as well, there aren't any casualties or very minimal casualties in terms of human life.
Yeah, so I was going to hit that. You just hit it right around the head. Just a note and a quick anecdote on how Cuba does things. So one, we should all know, if you don't know, Cuba does an excellent job of making sure that human loss is mitigated to a bare minimum when these things happen, right? When it's hurricane season, and you could just see the difference between the way they do things and how everybody else, including the United States, which leads me to my anecdote. So I know someone who knows a Cuban scientist who comes to the United States to do atmospheric testing in Colorado. So I'm over at we're having a thing at our friend's house. I think I might have mentioned this story before on the Sons of Fidel, but it's worth mentioning again. So we're all there drinking wine and having a good time. And the Cuban scientist said, we offered the Americans help, but that we're watching it from Cuba. This is about Hurricane Katrina. And we're watching the whole thing go down. We offered the United States help. And we're just thinking to ourselves, like, what the fuck are the Americans doing, right? This is the super capitalist country allowing everyone to get in their cars and get on the road. That's the work. That's the last thing you want to do. You don't want to do that. We knew what was going to happen. We're seeing it from Cuba, saying, what are the Americans doing? None of this makes any sense. Why would they let all those people, right, one person to a car, get on the road at the same time to try to leave? It did none of that. So all of the things, and that was just one of the things he mentioned. He mentioned a bunch of other things, but he said, we're watching it from home and we're experts at this stuff. And we're saying we would have gladly helped. Like, seriously, we would have been able to offer help, technical help and support. And then they rejected, of course. And, we saw what happened with Hurricane Katrina. So, I mean, it's just so that's my little anecdote there about that.
Also, to quickly add, Victor, that in Colombia as well, the hurricanes in the last year have ravaged the Colombian Caribbean coast. And again, like, you see the difference between how Cuba treats its people and how a country like Colombia treats its people, where the especially the black population, because that part of the Colombian coast is majority black population, and hurricanes that hit months and months ago, and the people still haven't gotten the help they need. To the point where I saw in the news that Snoop Dogg, I don't know through who, but is doing some kind of gig for relief for people that were affected by the hurricanes in the last year in Colombia and other parts of the Caribbean. So they leave it up to U.S. celebrities to come and help the devastated population in these countries. It's ridiculous. Well, it should be the job of the government, of course.
Absolutely. Some questions are coming in. I'm jotting some of these down. We'll leave that hopefully towards the end. So in the Dominican Republic. So let's shift over to a little bit. So we mentioned Dominican Republic, but here's some information, new data, new government data showing a rising rate of maternal mortality in the Dominican Republic. COVID-19 appears to be a major contributor to the spike. The main causes, however, are high blood pressure, bleeding, and infections. Operation Medusa in the Dominican Republic is a corruption investigation operation being conducted by the country's Attorney General's office. Jean-Alain Rodriguez, a former Attorney General himself, was just recently arrested under Operation Medusa. The charges include diverting public funds to a political group, the PLD, or Partido Liberación Dominicano. And so the former administration of Danilo, his cabinet has seen now a bunch of officials being questioned and detained. And this isn't anything new in the Dominican Republic. One administration comes in, and then the previous administration is put under a microscope. But it's all oligarchs sort of kind of fighting each other, right? So, and blaming each other for stuff and for corruption and whatnot. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that before we move on to Puerto Rico.
It's kind of similar to what's happening in Brazil, which we can get into in a little while, but it's very similar to what's happening with Bolsonaro in terms of corruption and COVID-19.
Moving over to Puerto Rico. This was astounding. So two things hit the news, but of course, none of this stuff is really being covered well or covered at all by the Western press. So we're going to cover it. U.S. Education Secretary Miguel Cardona recently announced that Puerto Rico is going to be earmarked to receive $4 billion in U.S. pandemic education funds. The funds are part of an effort to offset the pandemic's impact on the economy, the education system, and public health. In related news, this is, again, just astounding information. COVID-19's impact on learning from home in Puerto Rico, combined with constant power outages, has caused 24,000 students to fail their classes. And so he made a statement, Miguel Cardona, U.S. Education Secretary, with regards to this announcement of the $4 billion being earmarked to Puerto Rico, saying that Puerto Rican students have suffered enough. Your thoughts on that before I move on to the next Puerto Rican news update.
Same old. Just the same shit that we always hear with Puerto Rico. Unfortunately, still very much under the boot of the United States, and I guess the best we can do is support our community, our Puerto Rican community, in whatever way we can, so that they can achieve independence at some point, hopefully very, very soon.
Absolutely. I will continue to maintain that Puerto Rico is a powder keg waiting to happen. There's going to be an explosion there at some point. All of this stuff, all the contradictions, they're not sustainable. There's no way. There's going to be a breaking point, and you will see revolutionary activity again begin happening in Puerto Rico. I'm thoroughly convinced of that. In some other news, FEMA announced that Puerto Rico will receive. So you mentioned this before about hurricanes ravaging certain communities and still having these lasting effects. Well, FEMA announced that Puerto Rico will receive over $25 billion in federal funds earmarked for over 8,000 projects as a result of Hurricane Maria. So here we are now, it's 2021. We're still talking about Hurricane Maria and talking about Puerto Rico receiving, all this money because it still hasn't got his stuff together all these years later. So any responses to that, Carlos?
Yeah, it's despicable that is, after years after Hurricane Maria, and also to say that even though 25 million, how much was it? 25 million or 25 billion?
The report I read was over $25 billion.
Okay. Well, yeah, hopefully it does go into supporting the community, but no, we can't really hold our breath when it comes to also the politicians and the governors of Puerto Rico who, like in Dominican Republic and Brazil and so on, that we are seeing in the news recently in terms of corruption. I guess a lot of us will be pessimistic as to how that money is going to be spent. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm seeing a question here about statehood, which leads me to my next point. Bill S-780, introduced in the U.S. Senate, establishes a quote-unquote process for the admission of Puerto Rico into the Union as a state on equal footing with all other states based on a majority vote of the people of Puerto Rico. Co-sponsors of the bill are Senator Alex Padilla, Senator Ron Wyden out of Oregon, and Senator Brian Schatz out of Hawaii. They're all Democrats. And this isn't anything new. We can go back to the late 19th century, early 20th century. There have always been plans to try to annex Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Dominican Republic. There have always been congressmen who have been hell-bent on taking Cuba, taking Puerto Rico, and taking the Dominican Republic. But yeah, there's an actual bill that was introduced in the U.S. Senate. I have to get a little bit more information on whether I'm presuming it's sitting in a subcommittee somewhere. But anyone can look it up. I was just looking at it briefly, and I didn't get a chance to research it thoroughly. But I will hopefully, in the upcoming weeks. Carlos, any response to that? Okay, I don't think it needs a response. In Cuba, according to Cuba's Ministry of Public Health, there have been now 197,253 positive COVID-19 cases, leaving over 1,300 dead. About half of Cuba's population has received a single dose of a homegrown Cuba-made vaccine. And we've obviously talked about in the past here, but Cuba's involved in all types of biotechnology, which is just amazing to consider when, again, they just, their economy is being crippled and intentionally trying to be, the empire is trying to always destroy their economy. And yet they're able to do all this under the nose of the U.S. imperialism. Next point over here on Cuba, and this is actually we're going to lump up Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, but the United States has decided to keep Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, no coincidence, on a list of countries that quote unquote do not do enough against trafficking in person, providing zero evidence. In this report, the U.S. State Department states that the Cuban government, this is a quote, the Cuban government pattern to profit from labor export programs with strong indications of forced labor, particularly its foreign medical missions program, end quote. Cuba has now sent health brigades to some 40 countries in the fight against COVID-19. And this designation allows the U.S. a pretext to impose sanctions, freeze humanitarian aid, and bar these countries from loans. Any thoughts on that, Carlos?
I think, just to say that, again, like following on from what we were saying about the hurricanes and how Cuba's, the state's mentality is very different to the mentalities of the United States and the West. And so I don't think that the West can fathom. Of course, they use it as an they make up shit all the time to sanction them further. But also there's an element, I think, of them not being able to fathom that there's they would develop a project like this, with very little self-interest. Of course, there's always some kind of barter as well. Cuba does send doctors to places like Venezuela and other places around the world, and there is some kind of trade involved in it sometimes as well. Like we'll send doctors and you guys and then they do some kind of trade deal. But a lot of the time it isn't about that. A lot of the time it's the Cuban state and Cuban doctors themselves being willing to go out to the rest of the world and helping out. We saw that with the COVID-19 response early on, when I think doctors from Cuba were sent out to Italy and other places that were really affected. And imagine that, like Cuba, little socialist Cuba, sending doctors and medical support to the first world, to supposedly the first world, to Italy. So yeah, there's a bit of that. There's a bit of geopolitics again, like trying to asphyxiate Cuba's economy, but also the not being able to understand that countries do have this solidarity, especially in the global South, solidarity between these countries that feel that they're in the same boat.
Yeah, there's that. There's just like one Fidel Castro speech that kind of went viral recently, or the last couple of years, where he's saying, we're not bombing other countries. We're not, we don't have military personnel all over the world. We're sending doctors all over, and he kind of goes on. You see the crowd go nuts. And that's what Cuba does, right? That's what Cuba does. Meanwhile, the empire has military bases all over the world, right? That's what we do, and this is what little tiny revolutionary island of Cuba does. Moving right along, the Cuban staying on Cuba, the Cuban Council of Ministers recently approved a strategy to prevent gender violence, response, education, and training of personnel, buttressing of existing laws, as well as protection mechanisms for victims and their families are all part of this new strategy. Not sure if you had any thoughts on that.
Where was this?
This is in Cuba. Cuban Council of Ministers recently approved the strategy to prevent gender violence.
Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, that's awesome. And again, like, paving the way for the rest of Latin America, that, right now we, all of our countries, even the progressive countries, I think have a lot to do. When, I lived in Ecuador when Correa was in power, and there's so many things, so many positives, of course, in Correa's government. But things like abortion were still illegal. And I mean, it's not all about the state either. Like, of course, society itself. Like, I think Correa's government felt pressure that if they were to bring about some policies that were progressive in that sense, like in terms of abortion, that they would lose support from the general society. But I don't know. I don't think that's good enough. I think we do need to kind of progress faster and further. And Cuba again, leading the way, showing the way for the rest of the region.
Absolutely. Staying with Cuba, the 2020-2021 sugar harvest has been one of the worst in its history. The state group ASCUBA cited low performance due to broken equipment, low quality of raw material, and time lost in harvesting and transportation. Cuban officials state that the United States blockade is a major reason in the dive in production. And then we mentioned already the evacuation. Any thoughts on that before we move on over to Nicaragua?
Okay.
In Nicaragua, so in Nicaragua news, and so really the headlines really haven't changed much. So I'm not going to repeat the same things we've done in the past. It's the same headlines pretty much. However, Cuban American Senators Marco Rubio, Republican out of Florida, and Bob Menendez, right here in my state of New Jersey, Democrat, wrote a letter to U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken to put diplomatic pressure, put more diplomatic pressure on Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega. This comes after the Nicaraguan government has arrested about 20 political figures. And these political figures, according to the Nicaraguan government, have violated laws that protect the country's sovereignty against foreign intervention and meddling, among other charges. Both senators are co-sponsors of a new bill to review Nicaragua's free trade status. So again, you have Marco Rubio and Bob Menendez, who, these Cuban legislators, they just have like a total. It's like it's funny to me because I when Trump was in office, it's kind of what he did. He did the same thing too, which is kind of he led on. He needed the Cuban American legislators to tell him what to do on a lot of foreign policy issues. It's like, it's like they give somebody like a white guy, racist. Now they give him cover. So it's like, hey, you guys tell me what to do, and we good. So it's just crazy how that whole game is played. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like neocolonialism, but within the United States, like using and I don't know, like they're supposedly our own people, but we know that those Cubans are really like, wealthy, bourgeois, white. If we're gonna go into into race, and if you trace their lineage, you'll see that a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are descendants of the white settlers, of the colonizers. So yeah, but they do use our own people to do their bullshit as well.
Here in Jersey, a lot of people love Bob Menendez. They love him. They absolutely love him. Let me tell you something. And maybe we'll do a program in the future about that. This guy is ruthless. This guy is completely ruthless. He comes from northern Jersey, where you have a lot of real gangsters, not like fake gangsters, like real gangsters, out in the street and in the political arena. This guy's very cunning. He cuts a lot of deals, and he will cut your legs like from underneath. I mean, the guy is just ruthless. But Bob Menendez is just he's always been and on the issue of Cuba, forget it. The guy is just terrible. He won't budge, nothing. They use him, people like him, to go out and say stuff against Venezuela and Cuba and so on and so forth. So but anyways, moving right along, in El Salvador, there's a lot of stuff happening in El Salvador. So I'm hoping next week we'll have more than what we got today. So I apologize to the audience, but the government, with the approval of the Salvadoran President Bukele, and the National Minimum Wage Council, has agreed to a 20% increase in salary for more than 500,000 workers. However, since he's taken over, food prices have gone up, the price of raw materials have gone up, and production has slowed down. There's a lot of stuff that I'm hoping to report out next week that I'm trying to learn about now, and just want to make sure I have a full grasp of what's happening. But there's a lot of corruption happening at very high levels of government in El Salvador. I'll just say that. In Bitcoin news, because obviously that's been the big headline over the last couple of weeks, the U.S. State Department, this is interesting, the U.S. State Department has warned the Salvadoran government to regulate the use of Bitcoin. And they're offering some pretty harsh statements towards El Salvador. And the World Bank has rejected assistance requests by the Salvadoran government in its implementation of the new digital currency. So, I mentioned it last week. The president has promulgated this new law. They passed it, the whole thing, with really no input from civil society and the unions, the feminists, the teachers, the popular resistance movements out there, from really nobody. And his speech was very confusing and very contradictory. And people are very confused about what's happening with this whole thing with Bitcoin. So, again, I'm hoping next week I'll have more information on some of the stuff that's happening in El Salvador. Any thoughts on that before we move on to Venezuela?
No, I'm good.
All right. So Venezuela, and we talked about it last week, is underway with its vaccination program using Cuban-made vaccine, Adala. The expectation is to fully vaccinate 4 million Venezuelans using that actual product. And the UN's World Food Program's first shipment of food supply arrived in Venezuela just a few days ago. That program reached a deal with President Maduro to reach some 185,000 children this year, with hopes of expanding it to 1.5 million by the end of 2022, 2023. Maduro has been making a lot of public statements lately, trying to bring in foreign investment, trying to open up a little bit, has said that he's willing to meet with even the likes of Juan Guaido. And of course, Juan Guaido is continuing on with the same, pomp and rhetoric, and very aggressive rhetoric towards Maduro. The whole thing is just, I still find it somewhat humorous, because again, Juan Guaido is literally a nobody. He's just in his house pretending to be president. I'm going to continue to say that, because that's the reality. He just doesn't hold any real institutional power. Yet, certain foreign assets are still being frozen and not foreign assets that belong to the state of Venezuela, that they will not allow Nicolas Maduro to have access to, even though he's the legitimate. Everyone in the world pretty much has agreed that he is the legitimate president of Venezuela. I mean, even the folks who are playing that game along with the United States of that Guaido is president, they have to even acknowledge that. Yeah, I mean, he has no legitimate institutional power in Venezuela. Carlos, your thoughts before we move on to Brazil?
Yeah, so and it's very interesting the way the whole World Food Program thing has been reported in the media, and you see the comparison if you look at what's being said in Venezuela and what's being said by Maduro, and then what's being said in the West. It's kind of, for the West, it's kind of like an acceptance by Venezuela and Maduro of receiving this aid because of the crisis, the economic crisis, which is true. It's happening, but again, like we always say on the left, and that's the reason why I guess we're making the show, is to kind of show our own perspective as Latin Americans. We know that there are some leftist Westerners who report on this, and that's great. But we need our own perspective about our own homelands, our own region, our own diaspora. So yeah. The way it's being reported here and the way it's being reported there, and the most important thing for us as a diaspora to understand is that the crisis in Venezuela isn't an internal crisis. It's a crisis that is because of the sanctions. It's a crisis because of the international capitalist elite that continue to hold a lot of power in Venezuela, in Venezuela's economy. Those are the ingredients that are missing in the reporting in the West, that the reason why Maduro has accepted this aid from the World Food Program is because there's a recognition that there's an economic crisis, but it's an inorganic economic crisis. It's a crisis because of the sanctions, as Victor was mentioning. The assets, the state assets that are being held in the United States and in places like the UK as well, which means that the state hasn't got enough in their treasury to look out for their people, for the public services and so on. So yeah, I guess that's an important point. And in Venezuela as well, to mention, very important to know, for all of us to know, especially as a diaspora, especially for those of us who live in the US and in the UK and Europe, is that the head of the CIA, I believe his name is William Burns, is in Colombia right now, and Maduro has warned, because everybody's speculating, like, why is William Burns in Colombia, and he's been there for a while, as well as the head of the Southern Command, Craig Fowler, who's been there since the 20th of June. So there's speculations as to, they're saying it's a secret mission, secret operation, and we know, Maduro knows, Venezuela knows that those the CIA and the Southern Command meeting in Colombia right now poses a threat to Venezuela, particularly Maduro's warning about a possible assassination attempt against Maduro. So, that's a very important for us as Latin Americans in the diaspora to make sure that we know what's going on and to make sure that we're pressuring our local and national governments. Not that they're our, but they're not our, but we do have to do what we can and pressure them and push them and let them know that we're watching them, so they don't think that they can get away with something like that, if that's what they're thinking.
Absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that, by the way, because someone had asked, that was one of the questions that they wanted us to address. So thank you for that. And yeah, I mean, look, it's you don't have to be a rocket scientist to put two and two together. I mean, why is he there? I mean, clearly there's something, especially when you got that combination of the CIA director and what you said, the Southern Command, the head of the Southern Command. I mean, that's a clear indication that something may be happening, right? Either now or in the future. And this has been the case since that Chavistas took in power. It's never stopped. It's been a complete war, all out war against the Chavistas ever since they got in power.
And it's difficult to know. It's difficult to know what they're up to,
right.
Because it's so secretive. Nobody really knows. But we have to be on high alert. We have to. Right. We have to make sure that we keep our eyes on, because there's no good news. Right. Whatever they're doing, it doesn't matter whether it's about Venezuela or Maduro or whatever it is, it's bad news for Latin Americans. Absolutely.
Moving on to Brazil. So lawmakers have put in what they call in Brazil a super request for impeachment proceedings against President Jair Bolsonaro, citing his handling of COVID-19 and alleging over 20 the allegations that over 20 crimes have been committed. All prior impeachment filings have been blocked by the president of the Chamber of Deputies, Arthur Lira, a key Bolsonaro ally, which many are expecting the same to happen in this situation. The difference now is a couple things. So tens of thousands of protesters have continued to hit the streets demanding the removal of the president. So there's just a lot of now pressure from the outside, if you will, right? Not just internally in Congress, but from the outside now, just saying that this guy's got to go. Now, elections are right around the corner, so it leads me to my next point here, and then I'll wait for your response. President Bolsonaro has recently stated that he will not offer a peaceful transition to a new administration if he suspects any voter fraud. Former Brazilian president Lula da Silva is in the lead in most polls in Brazil for the upcoming election. And just to remind the folks, the Lula's leadership is also an economic boom that saw millions of people lifted out of poverty, extreme poverty, and millions of others in the working class community begin to see their wages increase and really see material conditions change in Brazil under the leadership of the Workers' Party. But yeah, so your response to all of that, Carlos?
Yeah, I mean, it comes as no surprise that Bolsonaro, there were already protests because of the mishandling of COVID, over 500,000 people dead. And people were already out on the streets, but this, and it was the left really that was out on the streets before, but this new case of corruption with some of his health ministry taking bribes, so that I think it's an Indian COVID medication called Covaxin, so that could be, and overpaying for it. I think, as it's being reported even in liberal Western media and right Western media, even right-wing and conservative Brazilians are not happy with this, and they're also going out on the streets to ask for his impeachment. So it doesn't look like good news for Bolsonaro. Who knows? Like Trump in the US, where there were a few processes of impeachment against him, but it didn't really go. It didn't really happen. So hopefully it does happen with Bolsonaro, and we can get like a left-wing government, left-leaning government at least, ASAP. But yeah, even if he's not impeached, it's most likely, and that's why Bolsonaro is very acting out and saying that he's not going to respect the political process and the voting, because he knows that it's not good news for him in the next elections. And Lula in the polls, he's skyrocketed, and he's the most likely to win. So Bolsonaro feels a bit of the pressure, and he knows that with somebody like Lula in power, he's probably going to be in trouble, and he's probably going to be put on trial. Hopefully.
We understand the limitations of liberal democracy, right? Of capitalist democracies, and what's interesting is that, okay, so let's try to play that game in Brazil, in Bolivia, and in Ecuador, and we're playing that game, and we're winning, and the oligarchs just they can't seem to grasp. They don't know what to do. They don't know because they can't beat the left at the polls. So they got to revert to other tactics and other strategies. It's just, and that's important for people to understand that. So even with all the limitations of liberal democracy, like, that we're handicapped, and yet we're still beating them. And then
we're not even talking about like an outright revolution. We're not talking about the workers taking power of the state directly,
right?
In comparison, these are quite light steps, and they are heading towards the right direction. But the desperation of the right, even at those light steps, even as a social democracy like what Lula brought about, and other places in Latin America, their desperation, at their reaction towards it shows how much they have to lose if we were to actually have an outright revolution. It's not to say that we don't have criticisms of Lula and other such figures, but I think it's a step towards the right direction, and like you said before, Victor, when Lula was in power and Rousseff was in power, the material conditions of the people did improve. It wasn't paradise, but it did improve. And especially now after this pandemic and how they've mishandled it, I think that's what the people want. Not even just the left wing, but also like just general society in Brazil need somebody like Lula or of the sort to try and handle things better.
I'm going to say this, and I'm going to continue to say this. There's a progressive and revolutionary arc, right, in Latin America. We keep moving towards one direction, and I was a little despondent and disappointed when you saw some of the setbacks, after the quote unquote pink tide, and I said, shit, like they got us, like we're fucked again. But then you're seeing it swing back, right?
Yeah.
And you just at the end of the day, you have to acknowledge it. You just can't stop it. There's nothing that anyone can do to really stop it. We're heading towards a certain direction in Latin America, and there's nothing that anybody could do to stop it. And the empire sees it, and that's part of the reason, us in the diaspora. That's why it's important for us to make that connection with what's happening in Latin America, and we have to be supportive of that process, and we have to stop applying these purity tests to some of these movements, because it's not fucking easy. All right. In Cuba, yes, they had an all-out war and liquidated the bourgeoisie. That's not what's happening right now in Latin America. We would hope for that to happen, but that's not what's happening right now. We're moving the needle, and we're going towards a certain direction. We have to be supportive of that process.
Yeah, and I think it's also because it's very easy for us in the West, especially white, the white Puritan left, to want this revolution. Like, Latin Americans must bring about revolution. Forget the social democracies and the liberal democracies, and but you don't live there.
Exactly.
You don't live there. You don't understand the conditions our people live in. Like Petro, like as a Colombian, Petro to me is not revolutionary at all. You know, he's really like, you know, right within the framework of capitalism. Like he doesn't talk about dismantling capitalism at all. But the people of Colombia want somebody like Petro to improve the conditions at least a little bit, especially politically, so that there might be some space, some kind of freedom for us to, for the more radical sectors of the left to have a space and to, you know, hopefully in the nearer future, achieve some power. So yeah, you know, from the West, thousands of miles away from the homelands, you know, criticizing is very easy.
You know how many sons and daughters we've lost over the last 100 years who fought for, you know, I was in the Dominican Republic. I always say, you know, I was in the Dominican Republic for what, 7-8 months or whatever it was. I spoke to several moms, and just in the one city, in the city of Navarrete, who lost their sons to revolutionary warfare. Like legit, like they were out in the street fighting and they got shot by the state. You know, yeah, it's real fucking easy to be an armed revolutionary in the West and say,
call for armed struggle when you don't have to pick up the gun.
Right. So, you know, some of the we have to put this stuff into context, and that's not to say that we're not for you know, for hardcore, but again, this stuff needs to be contextualized, and we need to be understanding, and we need to be supportive, because there is a progressive revolutionary arc. If you sit back and really analyze it, it is happening. It's not happening maybe at the pace that people want it, or how you want it, but that's not for us to decide, right? That's for the people out there to decide. So yeah.
And I think the best we could do in the West is support even the movements and processes that might not be super radical and revolutionary, but support whatever it is. Like Colombia, again, as an example, we right now don't have another alternative except for Gustavo Petro and the Pacto Histórico. That's the more realistic option right now, and we have to support it so that we can accelerate the process and hopefully through that bring in a new, more radical society. But yeah, we have to, in the West, the diaspora needs to submit to the will of our homelands, of the people in the homelands who are there directly facing the material conditions are devastating. And yeah, absolutely. And also to say, like in Brazil, like 500,000 people dead because of COVID-19. You know, so for somebody to say, you know, I'll just let somebody like Bolsonaro or whatever make the material conditions even worse so that there's a revolution, because, you know, some people say that, right. Let the conditions get as bad as possible so that there's an armed insurrection or something like that. It's ridiculous, you know, when people are literally dying by hundreds of thousands. So yeah, you know, hopefully we see in the elections. Is it next year in Brazil?
I believe it's next year, yeah, 2022.
Hopefully we see Lula or the Workers' Party, whoever it is, the candidate, win the presidency and you know, alleviate the conditions a little bit.
Absolutely. Moving on to Colombia, President Ivan, excuse me, President Ivan Duque has presented a new law in attempts to intimidate the Colombian people from protesting. Essentially, the new law presented to Congress would increase prison sentences for vandalism, roadblocks, attacks on police during protests. Duque is now being accused by many in the country as trying to criminalize protests. Your response, Carlos?
Yeah, so that I think that they're trying to pass the law and kind of they're trying to make the point that the roadblocks should constitute violent protest. So they're equating roadblocks and you know, the front lines in those roadblocks as engaging in violent protest. So by doing that, they're basically giving the military and the police and the riot police a free hand to deal with the protesters in whatever way they want. So, you know, that's super dangerous, and it's something that we need to keep an eye on. Also, to say that I'm not sure if people are aware, but Iván Duque, the president of Colombia, I think a week ago, a bit over a week ago, had supposedly an assassination attempt on a helicopter. His helicopter was shot up, according to him, though analysts are very much doubting that happened, and it was like a self-atentado is what they call it in Colombia. And the reason for it is because if you look at the helicopter and the way it was shot, and so him and his people say that they were up in the air, but then one of the shots looks like it's on the higher part of the wing, which would have been impossible from the ground. But yeah, following that, President Biden gave Duque a call to say that obviously he was glad that Duque is okay because of the assassination attempt, but also supposedly to tell him that he needs to respect protesters' rights and so on. This is what the White House says. But with knowing the U.S., their interest is not really in protesters' rights. We see that the U.S. itself, the U.S. government and the U.S. authorities themselves don't respect the rights of protesters in the U.S., let alone respect the rights of protesters in Colombia. So it's, again, like a bit of lip service, as Biden is very good at, to not show support, but to seem like he's progressive and he's not liking how Duque is responding to the protesters, and also the fact that again, like the CIA guy William Burns being in Colombia at the same time as him saying that is questionable as well. He's analysts are saying that is because there's something to do with Venezuela there, but it might also be trying to give some guidance to the authorities in Colombia into how to deal with the protests and stuff. Yeah, go ahead.
So here we go. So that leads me into the next the next headline here. The Subcommittee on Appropriations for Foreign Operations in the House of Representatives has agreed to allocate $461 million in aid for Colombia. $64 million of that aid is earmarked for the National Police and the National Army's counter narcotics budget. So there's
and one of the in Colombia, like the liberal left are like, they're saying that they did put a condition on those funds. They said that we will release those funds as long as the police respect human rights and blah blah blah. But they put those same conditions on the Colombian military when they've been funding them, hundreds of millions of dollars for decades. So the conditions is just, it's lip service again. Like it's like on paper, like here, like we're giving you money, but you have to respect human rights and stuff. But when does the Colombian military respect human rights? Right. For the decades that they've been engaging in a war basically against the population, and the United States not only turn a blind eye but play an active part in training them and also an active part in directly being involved. There's actually something in the news, I forget the guy's name, a CIA agent who played a part, who was also he was a CIA agent and was also employed by Drummond, which is a US company. I think it's some kind of natural resource company. I'm not sure if it's mining or whatever it is, or maybe it's an oil company, maybe. And so he was hired by Drummond whilst working for the CIA to get rid of union leaders in Colombia, directly assassinating them, and coordinating the assassinations against these union leaders. So this is quite direct involvement. We know that the US isn't our friend. They're giving the authorities in Colombia money to protect their economic interests and their geopolitical interests as well. So we have we understand that very clearly, even if unfortunately the liberal left in Colombia celebrating that there were conditions put on the Colombian police receiving these funds.
Absolutely. One last note on here on Colombia, and again, I'm bringing this up because I'm questioning, these dual positions, if you want to juxtaposition one with the other and whatnot. I'm more interested in what we're actually doing, right? So you mentioned CIA director being Colombia, the aid that's been going over there, but here's U.S. House of Representative lawmakers Abil Cities in my state of New Jersey. I don't have some very nice things to say about Abil Cities. I think he's spineless, and among other things, along with Joaquin Castro, Democrat out of Texas, very popular lawmaker, are asking the Biden administration to look into the political violence taking place in Colombia. A joint statement by both Cities and Castro. This is the joint statement. We are deeply part of the joint statement. We are deeply disturbed by reports of dozens of disappearances during the crackdown on protesters in Colombia. We call on President Duque and the Colombian government to thoroughly investigate each case, to locate those who are missing and reunite them with their families, according to the joint statement. So I just again,
I mean, verbal pressure is cool, but verbal pressure is good. But what about more immediate political action? When it's China, when it's Venezuela, when it's Cuba, there's immediate. There's not just, we're devastated at what's happening in Venezuela. It's not that. It's more like, what are we going to do in Venezuela? And which is what they don't do in Colombia. It's not that I'm saying that the US should be meddling in our affairs in Colombia as well, but it just shows, it shows that, there might be some politicians in the US who pay lip service to what's happening in Colombia, but in reality, like, if they were serious about it, they would take further, more profound action than just releasing statements and asking the Duque government to please stop the killing of protesters, instead of, I don't know, maybe trying to process him, trying to sanction him internationally like they do with other leaders. Yeah.
Right. So let's be clear what we're talking about. Again, there's a bunch of rhetoric and empty rhetoric, as far as I'm concerned, about what's happening in Colombia, and then there's what's actually happening in terms of the coordination between the empire and the collaboration between the empire and Colombia, materially supporting Colombia and this administration, and now, possibly logistically and technically supporting them, with the CIA director being there and the Southern combatant being there. So this stuff about saying, hey, by the way, can you please look into this, that, and the third about what's happening? Like, if this was happening in Cuba, if all these deaths and disappearances were happening in Cuba, in Venezuela, in Nicaragua, I have no doubt that we would be ratcheting up, headlines all over the place about, we have to invade, we'd have to do something. We need a military response to what's happening in these places. In Colombia, what are we doing? We're giving them money, right? My taxpayer dollars, we're giving them money, and now the CIA director's over there doing God knows what.
And the way they wash their hands is just by saying, "Oh, but we've put conditions on the funds."
Right.
We put it in the contract that they must meet these conditions, and just leave it up to them. How can you put conditions on the government and simply just ask them, like, can you please stop doing that, when we know that that's not how it works. The Colombian government and the authorities, the military and police, play a vital role in protecting capital and especially in protecting international and particularly US capital. So it's not about Duque himself being given this responsibility. If they were serious, it would be about sending missions to clarify and to see what's actually going on, which is stuff that they usually do in places that they do really want to get rid of the governments there, in places like Iran and other places where the US has economic and geopolitical interests.
Absolutely. Two last bits of headline news here. So in Chile, there are attempts in Chile to write a new constitution, and it is being met with protests. The left, and it's being described in the Western media as the left and quote unquote left and indigenous community are leading the protests. President Sebastián Pineda has not said anything of the recent events, so just something to keep an eye on in Chile. And then in Bolivia, in a Reuters exclusive, Bolivia's economy minister said that they're looking to stabilize the economy with a mix of fiscal spending, vaccines, and gold. And according to the minister, economic growth is expected to reach 4.4%. So we're seeing, now that the MAS party is back in power in Bolivia, we're seeing a sort of stabilization of the economy again, and things looking like it's heading in the right direction once again under the leadership of Evo Morales and the MAS party and whatnot. So any final? So we're a little over an hour. I didn't see too many questions. If anyone has any pressing questions, certainly ask us. And then, for the audience, look, if there's stuff out there, also feel free to reach out to us. If you find a nice little nugget in the news, send it over to us so we can report on it. But we appreciate the support. Please like, please subscribe, please share this content. Carlos, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Yeah, no, just to say that we, the reason why we're doing this, the reason why we're every Sunday now consistently going to continue doing these reports is because we feel it's important for us as Latin Americans in the diaspora to keep ourselves informed and to keep our own people informed. We don't believe ourselves to be like, the authority in knowledge or the authority in Latin American news. But we're just like anybody else in the diaspora. We're interested in what's going on in our home countries, in our home region, and as socialists, really, because this, we want to also give this report from a socialist and particularly from a third worldist point of view, because it doesn't exist anywhere else. Latin Americans with a socialist and third worldist perspective, giving a view of what's going on in our region, not just back in the homelands, but also in the diaspora. So yeah, anything that you guys want us to touch on, feel free to contact us on any of our platforms. And really, this is also about like filling a void. Because again, like we were saying earlier, we appreciate that there are, and I'll be straight up as well. I think there are some journalists, particularly white journalists, who make a living out of reporting on our people. Some of them with good intentions, some of them just because it's a career for them, and so we're filling that void. We don't do this. The Patreon, all the money that we get, we send back home to Latin American organizations, Latin American and Caribbean organizations. So yeah, we're not doing this to further our careers. In fact, we don't have careers in journalism. So we are amateurs at reporting, but we are deeply interested in the political, economic, and social situation back home and in the diaspora. So yeah, please do support us. We're going to continue doing this work regardless of if you give us Patreons or not, which is different to what the other reporters on Latin America would tell you. They say, please support us, because if you don't support us, then I can't make a living. But we're saying, no, we're going to keep doing this regardless if you give us Patreons or not. But if you give us Patreons, we'll be contributing directly to social change, to revolutionary change, to economic change, very urgent economic and material change in general. So yeah, that's all.
Carlos, all of that was extremely well put. I don't have too much to add to that. I will say this, just to give some people, some insight, behind the curtains, if you will, off air. Carlos and I had talked about this idea, and I said to Carlos, look, no one's really doing this. There's stuff happening in Latin America all the time. Just here in the United States alone, I believe it's 60 million Latinos we have. And so yeah, we're Latinos, we're brown folks, who have an interest in seeing that Latin American revolution that I talked about earlier thrive and be successful, right? It's important to us. It's important for our people to. This is a 500+ year war and struggle that we're in, right? For freedom and liberation. And so, we're doing this because I work a lot of hours. I actually have an actual job. I work for a public utility company. I'm a union worker. I have an actual job. And if I wasn't doing this with ANTICONQUISTA, I would still be, reading about what's happening in Latin America. That's what I've always done, right? And so we think this is important information to get out to the diaspora. Of course, for Black and yellow and white folks who are also interested and also willing to support, we want your solidarity as well, right? But to be clear, we're Latinos in the diaspora who are focused on the global South, who are focused on Latin America, who are focused on the revolution that's happening in Latin America, which I maintain that no one can stop it. The empire can't stop it. No one can stop it. No one on the face of the earth can stop it. There's a lot of good news coming out, being reported, and you have to kind of, depending on what your news source is, but China is heavily investing in Latin America, and that's scaring the shit out of the empire, right? And these are bilateral agreements that are happening with no military conditions and impositions. They're not saying to us, we can be critical of some of these deals. That's okay. But the Chinese are not saying to us, hey, they're not putting a gun to our head and say, hey, if you don't elect the right people, if you don't put the right person in power, then we're going to do this. So we're not having those type of impositions. And so, the empire is extremely concerned about China's activity in places like Latin America and Africa. Extremely concerned. And we're looking at a lot of infrastructure projects that are taking place in Latin America with the help of the Chinese. So folks, this work is important to us. It's important to our people, and it should be important to you. And we appreciate the support. But just let's continue to do this work, and we really truly appreciate your support. We're gonna go ahead and sign off. It's now almost 4:15. To all my people out there supporting us, we love y'all. Keep tuning in, and we'll catch you next week.
Take care, comrades.